Kidneys will be singing in 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Welcome to This Week in Perfect Team. Today we've got episode number 2 entitled Sweet, Sweet Canadian Fantasy. And that's what we're going through tonight. We are going to be looking at what Chris just dropped on us, which apparently was a fever dream that he had in making this content set. We've got some really cool cards. We're going to be checking those out. We've got 3 silver, 3 gold, 3 diamond, and 3 perfect. We'll probably spend the majority of our time talking about the perfect cards, but we've got some really good crowdsourced feedback on some of the tournament impacts of some of the lower cards. So again, our goal here for this show is to provide instant community feedback for what we just have been given, for the cards that just dropped for us. And that's what we'll be doing tonight. Thank you all for joining us. If this is your first time joining us for one of these shows, please do give us a follow. Please do click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we do stream in the future. To help me break it all down tonight, I've got your Kidneys, the keeper of the sheet. How are we doing tonight, Kidneys?
I'm doing well. I'm excited.
Very good. We are dropping no frames. So you guys may think that the reason that last week's stream was horrendous from an audio perspective, that it sounded like Kidneys was talking through a cup and a string, you guys may think that was because we're incompetent. You may think that you couldn't see any webcam movement because we didn't know what we were doing. But in reality, we were just strategically setting expectations extremely low. So as we are able to jump over that low bar, you guys will stick with us and we'll be able to have a good time. So if you are here with us, go ahead and jump into the chat, say hello. Looks like we've already got some people checking in there. So without any further ado, let's jump in. And we start with someone that I guess was a baseball player. Rance Mulliniks is not someone that ever entered my consciousness before. This is a name I've never heard of, but it immediately vaults near the top of my favorite baseball names. It just sounds like a baseball player here. And as we look at the card, it's a low silver. I'm obviously not going to play in any high-level main leagues, but when you're looking at a card like this, we're trying to assess, does this dent the existing silver tournament meta? Does this dent the existing cap tournament meta? And as I'm looking at this card here, you've got a defensive profile that really screams DH. You've got a contact profile that screams that he might not make a ton of contact, and he's not much of a base runner. So it's not one that really started off the stream with a bang in terms of being a card that I know everyone's going to be rushing to the auction house to snipe once people start pulling it in packs. But Kidneys, what do you see here?
So I'm actually going to read a quote from our silver tournament expert, Wait Till Next Year. And he says about Rance Mulliniks, if you like well-rounded cards, then this Mulliniks is for you. He won't hit or field well, and he should be equally ineffective on the base paths. As a lefty batter, Mulliniks rates well behind other left-handed batter options, such as Denny Walling or Wade Boggs. You'd also be better off plugging in a right-handed batter that can hit both sides of the plate, like Freddie Sanchez or Kevin Millar. Not to mention, you'd be better served playing any Negro League card with third base eligibility. Basically, he's a fun name, he's a favorite of Chris, but when your best stat is gap power, probably not going to make a dent in the meta.
Well said, and thank you to Wait Till Next Year for providing that very well written right up there. And that was he actually touched on one of the points that I was going to make before we move on here, that it's hard to comp this card because that gap power is such an outlier. Like, you don't have cards that have this contact profile, but also have this outrageous gap. So unless gap is secretly the new meta, and once people start playing this cards, all of modeling needs to change. I think we've got this one appropriately pegged as a cool name and not much else there. Moving on, we've got Lonnie Smith. So this one is a little bit more unique. And as you're looking at the card, it's hard for your eyes not to immediately jump to the base running profile here. You've got huge speed, a huge base running rating, and then stealing is up there as well. However, a point that you made on the stream last week, Kidneys, when you've got the speed well above the stealing, why don't you walk through our viewers as to what can happen in that situation?
Right, so the problem with speed and stealing is speed is how aggressive you are on the base pass. Stealing is actually how successful you are at stealing bases. So when your speed tends to be higher than your stealing, what happens is you actually end up getting caught stealing a lot. Doesn't matter that the number's high, you just run a lot and you're not as good at it. So the problem with this card is our silver experts compare him to SE Tony Taylor, but with slightly worse hitting, but better speed. The issue is he might get thrown out a lot still, and he's pretty much only a DH. Now, I certainly think you could find a place for him somewhere with his really good contact with that speed profile. It's interesting, right? It's certainly unique, and it's a little different for a silver card. But is he just straight up better? Probably not.
Yeah, and I think if you're playing in high-level diamond leagues or in the perfect league, you can see this phenomena in play with a player like Pop Lloyd. Pop Lloyd's got an incredible base running rating. He's got very high speed and stealing that is beneath his speed. And so you end up seeing most people turning that slider down. Some people even turn it all the way down so he doesn't attempt stolen bases or rather just a small handful in a given year. And I think that's what ends up being the fate here with this card. So that kind of is the fly in the ointment. That could be a very useful card off the bench, or maybe platooning in there against left-handed pitching, because you're not really going to get high BSR out of him because of all of those caught stealings. Moving on, we've got Ron Karkovice. So Ron Karkovice is a player that I hold not near and dear as Chris clearly does here, but as I was growing up, my grandfather was a big Sox fan, and Karkovice Fisk was the platoon there. And I always remember thinking that Ron Karkovice looked like a cat. Now that could have been a kid who didn't know what he was looking at there, or he could look like a cat. I don't know. But check it out and really be the judge yourself. But this card here is a very defense-oriented card. The bat is really not going to provide much. You've got contact sub 50, avoid K sub 25. And as we look at the bat similarity scores, really you've got to take existing cards and then subtract across the board to find our nearest comp. So I think Ron is going to be someone who might provide some value with the glove, but the bat's really going to hurt you. But what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much summed it up. The problem with Ron is going to be his hitting, and frankly, I have him as the worst hitting silver card in the game by quite a large margin. So I'd like to talk about something a user on the forums by Ronco said. And Ronco's, if you haven't read his stuff, I mean, just go read through his post history. The guy is unbelievable, one of the OGs of deciphering how the game works. But what he said is contact should or avoid Ks should actually be called contact. And that might be a little confusing to some newer players, but basically avoid Ks is how often you make contact with the ball, right? It's the difference between a swing or miss or putting a ball in play, not necessarily in play, but making actual contact. So the problem with having such low avoid Ks is he's almost never going to actually make contact with the ball. So even while he has decent power, he's just not going to hit the ball well enough for that to be a factor.
Very good. Let's move up to the gold tier cards. And we're starting with a Dave Winfield here. And this Winfield, and I guess let's start with a confession. So I have never played a gold tournament. So I don't know that there's many people less qualified to break down new gold tournament cards than me. But luckily, we've got a network of people, including some of the people that you've cited so far. But as I look at this card, just at first blush, you see someone who's a little bit more powerful against lefties, a little bit stronger profile there with both the avoid K and the contact juiced up there. And then power, obviously 21 additional points and a little bit stronger eye. So clearly someone that's going to hit left-handed pitching significantly better than right-handed pitching due to the inherent advantage of getting on that pitcher's weak side. From a defensive perspective, I would imagine that this is not preferable defense within that gold tourney meta or within the cap tourney meta, but probably something that you could live with. You'd love it if there was left field stock defense here instead of just right, because you often prefer the better glove to be over on that other corner there. And this one, you might be hesitant to roll it out there with just the right field defense. But what do you see on your end?
In the wise words of wait till next year, why not a 79? I mean, he's very close, I think, to being good. He might have some use at a cap tournament if you're going more on the power end. Power is a bit better in tournaments because of the difference in the baseline. But Nothing eye-popping. Like you said, it's a shame he doesn't come with stock left field options because he could be playable left field in the tournament. Probably not playable in right field, more of a DH type card. Yeah, nothing super stands out with this one, but he's not entirely useless either, I think.
All right, let's move on. We're going to need our minutes for those perfect cards awaiting us at the end of this deck here. Next card, another great name. So if nothing else, Chris is giving us some incredible new names. Dots Miller, another card, another player that I've never heard of before, and I'm now happy that I have heard of him. And this guy's bringing a little bit of an interesting profile to the table. I mean, first, for you sacrifice bunt aficionados out there, I don't know what else you could be asking for. This guy can lay him down all day and twice on Sunday. But seriously, from a defensive perspective, that seems like a pretty acceptable infield defense there. With some additional cards that have hit the meta recently, giving you more defense, perhaps that's beneath the threshold that you're looking for within that tournament meta there. But that's not. He's not a train wreck at second base, a decent base runner. And then from a contact perspective, he's going to be a little bit better versus left-handed pitching, but somewhat of a balanced card here.
Yeah, certainly a balanced option overall, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it struggles sometimes to make a card a good card as well. Breaking down, I had two analysts this week help me out looking at some Gold Tourney metas that I'm not a player myself. They're API and somebody who wants to go unknown. They're comparing them to a lot of the infield gold options like Nelly Fox, Bill Mazeroski. Say a very close comp is Brian Roberts. But the problem is his D is just a little bit lacking for a second base. The niche with this card is he is a dead ball card. So with all the cool new tournament options, if we get a dead ball gold type tournament, he could certainly see play in something like that. Would probably be a superior option. But ultimately, one of those cards is just slightly worse than the competition. But he just beat them all in the name competition. That is a fantastic name.
So Dish just asked a really good question in the chat. And I know it's something that you know intimately well, but he's asking how you determine BABIP with the ratings. Perhaps you could talk for a minute about the relationship of BABIP, really where that comes into play, and how one should be thinking about that when they look at cards.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics, so this is probably going to take a little bit. So DishNet, BABIP, for those who don't know, batting average on balls in play, is a statistic on the back of the card. It's a hard card statistic that helps determine when the card hits the ball, where does it go kind of a deal, right? And so actually contact isn't a real statistic. It's not a hard measurement. It's not how often he puts it on play. Contact is actually an amalgam, a combination of power, avoid Ks, and BABIP. So there's a very advanced formula. You can actually look it up on my spreadsheet. If you haven't seen it, it's pinned in the Rosters and Strategies channel on the Discord. Highly recommend giving it a check out and looking at the formula. I don't understand it, but we know from last year that it works. So what it does is it subtracts the Ks and the power from the contact and gives you a number called BABIP. And you can use that to estimate how often a player is going to get on base when he hits a ball in play. So because of that formula, basically a player with a high contact, a lower power, and a lower avoid K will have a higher BABIP. Somebody like Cristobal Torriente is like the king, the god of BABIP versus right-handed pitchers. He has 108, which is absurd. It's out of this world, right? And what makes him one of the more consistent cards in the game. Now, if you just looked at his ratings, you wouldn't necessarily notice that. So some very interesting stuff there. DM me if you want to learn more about this stuff. I love talking about BABIP. It's definitely one of the most important facts in the game and something you can't just see by looking at a card.
And I'm actually glad you brought up Torriente because he's an interesting use case. So yes, from a BABIP perspective, you can't really top his rating there, but BABIP is not the end-all, be-all. So we're not here alluding to some secret sauce that's going to vault you to the top of your league every week because you now understand the relationship of BABIP. It's just another consideration, and as such, Torriente is not really even a meta player anymore. You know, he had his time where he was effectively a platoon corner outfielder, but that time has come and gone with the face of the franchise for sure. So even though he is the king of BABIP, he's not someone that you want to be caught using in a high-level league. Moving on, we've
Yeah,
got
for-
Albert Bell. And I can't think of Albert Bell without seeing Fernando Vina getting blown up at second base. Like the two just go hand in hand. I almost wish that Chris would have released an Albert Bell and a Fernando Vina duo here. But as far as just looking at the card here, I find it interesting. This card and the one that's going to follow here, it's a right-handed batter. Albert Bell was a very powerful right-handed bat who actually has a better contact profile versus right-handed pitching. So his avoid Ks is better. His eye is better. His contact is the same for both. He's got more power versus left-handed pitching. But given that that bottom half of the card there, I think this one's going to perform relatively neutral versus pitching once you factor in the pitching advantage of being same hand versus offhand. And then as you look at defense here, you've got a very meh left field profile here, but not one that you would feel it would be a complete disaster to throw out there.
He's another borderline card, right? He's got the borderline defense. His speed splits are actually pretty good. And then his hitting is like just around the border of being really good, right? He could certainly be a DH for a gold tournament team and be consistent with that. Like you said, he's got really good splits, so you don't have to platoon. So maybe you could save a spot there. Maybe possibly in some sort of gold cap or cap team, you could run him as a DH because you don't need to platoon him. He's an interesting card. He's certainly not a bad one. I'm not sure entirely how he plays compared to the other top gold DHs, but he should be pretty solid overall.
Yeah, and if you look at the similarity score, we have some evidence as to what you might be able to expect with Albert Bell. If you look at, for example, his versus righty profile, I mean, Bobby Higginson is almost a doppelganger. You know, a couple points up here, a couple points down there. So you could, if you have some gold tournament data, you could check out Higginson, what he does versus right, and have a decent idea on what he's going to do. And then you can use the rest of the similarity score to do similar exercises. Next, we've got Albert Pujols, 90 Albert Pujols, and I believe this is our second 90 Albert Pujols, so don't get confused here. This one is a third base card, and this one comes stock with defense at 4 positions. You get first base, third base, left field, and right field, which certainly there are a lot of formats, notably tournaments, where having additional stock defense is an asset to you. This is another card that actually looks better versus same-handed pitching. So better contact, better avoid K. The eye actually flips the other way versus left-handed pitching. So I find that somewhat interesting. Speed, he's a 0 here. Defensively, you really don't want to have a 27 error rating at third base, especially if you're in any sort of tournament that this card would be applicable to play in. So I'm guessing that you're just going to put this at first. I have not seen the outfield ratings yet. I think we probably need to wait on someone to pull the card or for Chris to post it. But I would guess based on the 41 left field and the 29 right field, it's not going to be something to call home about. But what do you see?
So yeah, like you said, the second 90 overall pools in the game, which I believe is the first time we've gotten a duplicate card that's not 100 overall. So that's just a fun factoid. But hits better versus right-handed pitching than the other 90. Quite a bit worse first left, but he does come with the extra stock utility. So maybe in a tournament you play him as some sort of DH that can flex to 4 different positions, maybe in a cap type tournament because of the ability to flex. Nothing really special. Like you said, he's slow, he can't bunt. Just probably at best, this is a utility option for, I don't know, maybe somebody starting out or for some interesting diamond cap tournament that I haven't come across myself.
So here's a question for you. As you build your sheet, do you have the coding capable to accept 2 Albert Pujols 90 cards with neither being like a face of the franchise or a special edition card?
Yeah, so this will go as rookie sensation or probably RS Albert Pujols into the database, and he'll be Albert Pujols 90 RS, and that'll be what he looks like in there. Yeah, it's weird not putting FOTF or SE after a duplicate card, but yeah, I don't know. More Pujols. I love Pujols growing up. One of my favorites. So definitely a cool person.
Moving on, we've got Roger Clemens. And I'm going to lean on you again here, Kidneys. I think this might be our first mirror card or the first one that's ever risen to my consciousness where you have exact same identical ratings for each side, and then obviously you roll that up for identical ratings in his general ratings. And honestly, this is a card that I think would have played plenty earlier on in the meta, with a profile that's got enough stuff, and you're going to get a little snuff boost as you move it to the pen. It's got okay movement, and then what was at one time acceptable control, really most applicably in the bullpen itself. A good hold runners rating, so you know you're not going to get abused late there. And then as you look at the sim scores table, you do see a lot of cards that used to hang around in Diamond Leagues. You know, I'm looking specifically at Rube Wahlberg, Vic Wallace. Max Lanier was used in many bullpens in the first 8 to 12 weeks of the higher level leagues here. So I think this is a nice card, one that if someone is in a silver league or a gold league and you pull it, I definitely wouldn't tell you to not to use it, you know, unless the auction house was giving you a super premium for it being a new card. But what do you see when you look at this Clemens card?
So interesting factoid, the Silver Spawn is actually a mirror, as Chuck and Dishnet pointed out in the chat. So it's not our first mirror. I know there's another card that's like 1 point off. I can't remember the name of it though right now. Yeah, like you said, it's a little late to the party, right? He's certainly not terrible, but you're not going to be able to play this card in High Diamond or in Perfect League. But certainly in Gold and below, he could be a very, very good relief pitcher. Probably not going to gain a huge stuff boost because of the amount of pitches. Probably something like around a 7, I would think, just looking at it. But, I mean, 110 plus stuff with okay movement, okay control, good stamina. You could certainly run him out of the bullpen at the lower level if he's going for cheap. Yeah.
All right, moving on. We've got Tony Phillips. And as I was looking at this card, the thing that popped to me was this is a great utility card, but not at the highest level. So this is not going to be a competitive utility card in a high-level Diamond League or in Perfect League, but one where, again, if you're in Silver or Gold working your way up and you stumble upon this card, you know, that defensive flexibility, being able to play a very good outfield and a very good infield, and you can train him across the board, will have some value. Now, from a contact perspective, you know, he's not really a standout with either contact or avoid K, but does bring a very healthy dose of I to the table. So if you are in one of those leagues and you turn down the BABIP on your home park and really try to amplify those walks and the impact of those walks, that could be one way to do it. From a similarity score perspective, you don't see a bunch of cards here that are used heavily in high-level leagues today. You know, Mike Trout 100 was someone who was somewhat of a staple in Diamond Leagues early going, but you don't really see him anymore, especially on the other side of the face of the franchise release.
Yeah, so certainly. So our Diamond tournament expert, at least for this week and probably moving forward, is Doc Fury. And Doc brings up a great point that this card for Diamond tournaments at second base is very comparable to Johnny Evers. More Johnny Evers v. left, with a really good eye, kind of middling contact, and then okay defense. But the advantage of this card over Johnny Evers is, of course, that really cool utility. He's got base training at 5 positions. We don't know the outfield stats yet, or at least I don't. I haven't seen him pulled. But 91-87 in the corners is pretty playable. Certainly playable in a tournament. So I think there's use for this card in a Diamond tournament, maybe as a good backup. Could be pretty solid. But if you're playing him for second base, Johnny Evers in a tournament Diamond setting would certainly probably be better than this card. But the utility is very cool. Not going to play in Perfect League or Diamond League because people like myself, I run Craig Biggio for the face of the franchise, is a fantastic utility card if you really need one.
Yeah, I really like that Evers comp. So Evers was a card, a budget card that I picked up on my ascension through the ranks and ran him from probably around Stone all the way through maybe my first 3 or 4 weeks in Diamond. And that good defensive profile, good eye, certainly it has a lot of use, or at least had a lot of use back in that meta. And I think in the lower levels, you could probably extract a lot of that same similar value here. Let's move on. And I think we're going to need some time on this one because this is a really, really interesting card. It's Tom Glavine, and honestly, I thought Tom Glavine had a great chance of being a face of the franchise for the Braves, obviously with the clues that came out that didn't end up being the case. But then when Chris was teasing that there was going to be an editing room floor card, and he mentioned the Braves, I thought we were getting a Glavine, and instead we obviously got the Maddox face of the franchise. But I am so happy that we now have a very competitive Glavine, and this profile here is super, super cool to me. So much so that I am announcing it as the DRC fave from the stream. Looking at this profile from a left-handed pitching perspective, it's absolutely awesome. The 112 control is just off the charts there, and you're not really giving up much anywhere. You got the 109 stuff, 96 movement, so he's going to be a really rough ride for left-handed batting. And so the debate to me is just going to be, what is the optimal way to deploy Glavine? I'm beyond whether or not this is going to be a usable card. It definitely is in my mind. It's just a matter of me trying to figure out the very best way to extract maximum value with him. Now, as you look at the similarity scores, you see from a general perspective, just stuff, movement, control across the board. Maddox is his closest doppelganger here. You take the 99 Maddox and juice the control, and that's Glavine. Or you take the 100 Maddox, give it a little control, take away some stuff, take away some movement, and that's Glavine. Now, obviously, you need to dig into the splits because the devil's in the details there to understand how it's going to perform. And on his weak side, you've got Pete Alexander as the number one comp. And so Pete Alexander with a little bit less stuff and a bunch more control, that's going to be a competitive card. Like, Pete Alexander is someone who I rotate in every now and then when I need a fresh arm in the pen, or maybe even someone to be an opener in perfect league. So Alexander can play, and that's going to be Glavine's weak side. And then as you look at his strong side, he is the new beastly Spawn and Maddox cards with more movement and more control. So this is going to be an awesome card. I haven't fully wrapped my arms around what I want to do with it if I were ever one day lucky enough to have one. But where's your head at on it?
There's one problem with this card. I love this card. I wish it had less pitches so it would get a higher stuff boost in the pen. Comparing those similarity scores for this card are fantastic. Looking at V Righty, all those cards are playable in high diamond, and he just blows them out of the water with control, which, if you don't know, is by far the most important movement statistic. I mean, coming in V left, and just look at that control blow everyone out of the water. Blows Maddox out of the water. Blows Spawn out of the water. I mean, 112 is the new high across every card for control. It is the best V left markup, I think, in the game right now. And it's going to be really interesting. The thing is, you'd really want to play this card out of the pen as an opener, or as a follower, sorry, because of the splits. And he's not going to gain a big stuff boost from doing that. So the question is this card good enough to be a meta follower in a right-handed favored park or a left-handed favored park, and you play this card? I don't know. It's very close. Can you just straight up start this card at the highest level? I think so. I know others are going to disagree with me, say his verse right split's a little too low, but 106 control V right for me makes up all the difference in the world. I'm so high on this card. He's a ground ball pitcher too. I love me some ground ball pitching.
Yeah, and again, I haven't fully formulated my opinion on where I think it's going to fit in. As with any left-handed starting pitching in the meta right now, if you just throw them out there and let them go 6-7 innings, they're going to be facing roughly 7 out of 9 hitters or right-handed batters. So as you look at this card, the rating in the middle there is going to be applicable 2 of 9 hitters, and the rating on the right is going to be applicable 7 of 9 hitters. So you're definitely not maximizing his ability by having him face a heavy majority of right-hand pitching. That being said, he can be very successful in that mold, and the only argument that I'd hear otherwise, or that I see being very compelling otherwise, is that of starting a right-hand pitcher and then having him come in as the follower for a lineup that is flipped the other way, 6 or 7 left-handed batters that he's going to face. I think if you just throw him in a stopper type role and let him rack up 75 to 80 innings in a given year, I think, he's going to be great. He's going to dominate those left-handed batters that he faces, but I think you could be shorting yourself the overall impact of the card. Now,
Yeah, no, he's got the splits are really interesting, and I think people are gonna just look at that 90 stuff and the 87 movement averse right, and they're just gonna say, this doesn't look like the new cards we've been getting. But I mean, you gotta just look at the control, man. The control is everything here, and 106 means he's very, very rarely gonna walk people. And so even when they do hit the ball, he's got a ground ball profile, and you're going to see that put into play. If you're running a black hole type infield with your Pop Lloyd on second and your Ozzie Smith at short, he's just going to soak up runs. I think he's a really good card.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think you hit on something there that your infield could be even more important with him, as it is with any ground ball pitcher, especially any ground ball pitcher that is giving up a lot of contact. You think of how people shield pitchers like Ed Walsh or pitchers like Maddox, making sure that they're avoiding those high BABIP environments, making sure that they've got a defense behind them that can really scoop up the ball. Another thing that I wanted to just touch on briefly here is stamina. And I don't recall off the top of my head what the recent Pedro stamina was for the topper that just came out, but I want to say it was within a couple clicks of this one. So do you see this one needing to be pitch counted?
Probably you want to pitch count him somewhere 90, 100 range. I wouldn't let him go higher than that. Pedro was 87, if I recall. So very similar between the two. That is another reason why I would love to make him a follower, as well as the stamina won't be as big of an issue. So I just really think this is, we got Walter Johnson as like one of the best right-handed follower options. Now we get Tom Glavine as potentially the best left-handed follower option, and just certainly very interesting for him to see how he plays out. Going to be a card I'm really excited to look at in the weeks to come.
All right, we'll close the book on Glavine and then move on to Tim Raines. So this was a card that I know that many people have been expecting to come at some point, and it's finally here now. And then as you look at this card, I've thrown in some OPS numbers from the comps for what we see within Perfect League. And I think what you're going to find within that similarity table is a lot of OPSs that you don't love. And so I think purely from a bat perspective, this is not going to be a card that's going to come in and really produce excess value with the bat. But that's not the totality of what Raines brings you as a player. Like, clearly he's a base stealer. And so you look at the 109, 107, 105 across there. I don't know, Kidneys, if you have opinion about when the ratios are this close. So yes, speed is greater than stealing, but it's just a couple of numbers. So do we still see the detrimental impact there? We can get to that in a moment. From a defensive perspective, the range is less than meta right now. So again, we talked about this last week, but corner range is normally 92 and above. And so this one's coming in at 87. Definitely not a train wreck, not something that you couldn't get away with, but definitely something that you're going to be yielding some value to over the course of a season. And then within the bat profile, we're so used to seeing all the cards the last 4 or 5 weeks where they're coming out and there's some rating that's well over 100. You've got 121 contact or 150 power or 125 eye, and this card looks like a card that it's not too dissimilar to Clemens, really belongs in a meta a couple evolutions ago, where it could have been very competitive and really given some of those cards fulfilling this type of role a run for their money. I worry that the contact in the context of the other cards within high level leagues might render this one really just a pinch runner. But what do you think?
I think two things. I think this card is good. I don't know if it plays in perfect, but it's good in diamond. And I think Chris is very wrong. It's not a center fielder. So just shouting out Chris right there. 87 doesn't play. I think 96 is our minimum right now for center field. But regardless of that, 87 borderline corner outfield for like the highest level. Probably a little bit on the low side, but we do see teams right now that are experimenting with Ty Cobb in left field. And it's actually been pretty successful. So I think there's merit to playing him in the outfield. I certainly wouldn't play this card as a DH. I really like the Tommy McCarthy comparison. The problem was when Tommy McCarthy originally hit the first Perfect League, he just died. He could not compete because he was too split even down the board, and he didn't excel really at anything in particular. So I think the issue, this card suffers from a little bit of a Tommy McCarthy profile, where the Ks are like 80s, so they're at the lower end. And even though the contact's at the higher end and the power's low, he might not be able to make it. Now, that said, let's look at the speed. You're talking about how does the speed profile compare because it's so tight. So you normally want your speed to be around 10 less than your stealing. However, when speed and stealing are so high, like they are on this card, it doesn't really matter. You get to a point where he's going to steal bases because he has 107 stealing, right? I think overall he switch hits is another thing to look at because switch hitters get a little bit of a boost for hitting, and this card is just, I don't know. I really like the profile with the speed. Maybe he's not complete endgame, but if you're like in low diamond or gold, you will love having this card on your team. I think he will be a fantastic card.
How would you feel about this card if it had 100 avoid Ks on each side?
I would say this card plays endgame in Perfect League without a question.
Because it would then likely have a strong BABIP rating, or why do you say that?
No, BABIP would actually go down if the Ks went up. The reason why having the higher Ks is so important is because Ks contract against stuff, right? That's what it compares to. So when you're playing for an at-bat, it goes, is it a walk? Checks your eye versus your control. Then it checks, is it a strikeout, right? It checks your stuff versus your Ks. Then it tells you, is it a ball in play? So it uses the BABIP to determine where the ball is hit. Then it's like, is it a home run is first? And then gap power gets applied last, which is that entire game, that hitting sequence right there. You can break into that and decipher your entire game. Yes, it's I first, Froggy. I see you in my chat. So when the Ks are higher, the card is going to make contact with the ball, like I explained earlier. So if your card is making contact with the ball, they're going to move runners, they're going to score, they're going to get on base more. And with all the high stuff cards coming out, Avoid K is even more valuable than ever now.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. We've got a good question in the chat here from Jaladuce24, just asking what is low versus high diamond, and really there is no difference between diamond leagues on its surface. However, with groups choosing to align with friends lists, you have some leagues that just are significantly better than others. You've got the DLL, Diamond Legends League, which has week in and week out been the hardest diamond league around. You've got the league that Rich is in now, OL, which I don't have as much experience with that one, but it seems like they're taking care of Rich pretty well this week as well. So there are, like, a random diamond league would be a full click or two beneath a high level diamond league that has people aligning by choice via friends list. And honestly, some of those leagues really more closely resemble Perfect League than they do a random diamond league. I actually ran an exercise maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago to run like a strength calculation of the teams in each. And at the time that I was doing it, the high end was slightly higher in Perfect, and the depth was higher in Perfect. But a league like a DLL compared very favorably, where it was just a notch below on the high end, and then from a depth perspective, it was maybe 18 teams deep in terms of very high level quality rosters versus a random diamond league, which might be closer to 5 or 6. Moving on, we've got one card left, and before we talk about the ratings on the card, let's first talk about the card art. I just love these cards, the ones that fit this profile here and look like this. So kudos to the art team for coming up with this. That's a card that I want before I even see the ratings, just by looking at how cool the card art is. And then when I get to the ratings, I see a reliever with incredible stuff, and a reliever with good control, and a reliever with acceptable movement. So definitely one that is interesting, and at a minimum is part of a rotation of arms that you'd have even at the very highest level. I think for most teams up through Diamond, this is going to be a card that you'd die to have. You'd die to get your hands on because the stuff's incredible, and he's not going to be too bad with the walks. As we look at the sim scores here, he's basically a much better Rob Dibble. A Rob Dibble that fixes the big bugaboo with Rob Dibble, which was horrible control and somewhat questionable movement. So this is basically your Dibble on steroids there. And then getting into the splits is pretty split neutral. Now, split neutral doesn't mean he's going to be as good versus righties as he is against lefties, because most batters have strengths and weaknesses based on the handedness of the arm. So if a pitcher has neutral looking or relatively neutral splits, they're still going to be worse versus lefty. It's just that stark contrast will be less. And some of the recent cards like Bob Feller, Face of the Franchise, would be good examples there. But looking at this comp table, there's a lot of names that are solid here. You've got Bruce Sutter, who has been a card that a lot of people use. Eckersley has somewhat fallen out of favor, but was a meta reliever for a very long time. Down in the VR table, you've got Lee Smith, who's obviously one of the better pitchers versus right-handed batters as well. But what do you think of this card, Kidneys?
I mean, it's fantastic, right? Like the stuff is astronomically high, and it's got solid control, very basic reverse splits. But like you explained, he still will be weak reverse left because he's a right-handed pitching closer. For example, I have him 5 overall v right and 12 overall v left as a true relief pitcher, right? Just because there's that slight differentiation because he's a right-handed pitcher. But overall, really, really solid. Throws hard. The only issues with this card is a lot of people don't run true relief pitchers in the pen. And with the new Trevor Hoffman face of the franchise, the question is, do I want 2 of those? And I think the answer in a lot of cases now will be yes, I want Eric Gagne and I want Trevor Hoffman at the end of my pen. Whether Gagne sets up for Hoffman, he can set up pretty realistically with the good splits. I see Rufus asking in the chat, how do you compare him to people like Fernandez and Gooden? He's a lot better than Gooden, in my opinion. I'm not a big Gooden fan because of the control. Because I is first in the order of operations, and Gooden will walk a lot of people before he gets the chance to strike them out. However, very, very similar to Jose Fernandez, except he has better control. The trade-off is you're going to lose those extra innings that Fernandez can eat. So it's really going to be a preference thing based on how you build your other pieces of your bullpen. How many other true relief pitchers do you have in there versus starting pitchers?
Yeah, I think Gooden is someone who's trending towards not playable at the very high end because of that control factor. And some of the early returns that I've seen off of Feller just have an unsustainable walk per 9. So having this card with a 90-plus control, I think, is going to vault it well above a card like Gooden. And I think you hit the nail on the head as you compare it to Jose Fernandez. I think that Gagne is going to be a better card per plate appearance, but he's got a stamina of 16, so he's not going to be able to run out there and shut the door from the 7th inning on like Fernandez can do in a stopper role. Gagne is more appropriately going to be a middle relief closer because you just can't get that same mileage out of him. All right, Kidneys, the time has come. Time has come for you to tell the world which one's your favorite. Everyone knows that Glavin's my favorite, but which one really stuck out to you as either one that interested you the most, or you enjoyed the most, or just as the one that you appreciated the most?
Probably Tim Raines, man. I mean, switch hitting, like, if you've ever played baseball at any level and you tried hitting from the opposite end of the bat, man, it is hard. To be able to switch hit so evenly at such a high level while being such a freak of nature with speed, just a really cool card. Really interested in it. I'd love to have one on my team as my utility outfielder. I think it'd be fantastic.
Next question for you. What do you think the first Glavin goes for on the auction house?
Oh, man. I don't know. Like, the buzz, I haven't been seeing a lot of buzz about this card, and I'm really disappointed because I think this card has big buzz behind it. I think somebody who's running some sort of follower opener type strategy needs this card on their team. With how high we've been seeing cards going, like Greg Maddux is averaging like 2.5 million right now. I wouldn't be surprised if this card goes over 1 million for the first one pulled, but I don't know. I think there's a disappointing reaction to a really good card here.
And I think it could just be the stuff. We have been trained and we have come to learn that we're wowed by big stuff numbers. We see what Walter Johnson turns to in the pen. We see what some of the Feller card, for example, and Control is just like laying in the weeds as this extraordinarily valuable category that doesn't get as much pub. Looking at Maddux 100, the non-face of the franchise one, that's been like the best card up until last week. And from a stuff perspective, it's not all that impressive at all. Now, obviously, it is above where Glavin is today. But I think as you look at Glavin, especially if you're running something like a lefty cheese park, where a lot of the concern about the contact that righties are going to make against him go away, if you're minning the average, if you're minning the homers, if you're minning extra base hits, like Glavin is going to knife through lefties, and righties are going to have a heck of a time doing damage in that environment. So I haven't been paying much attention to the Discord or seeing what buzz does or doesn't exist for these guys. But I know that I'm personally excited for Glavin. I hope that someone gets him and gets him into Perfect League right away so that I can get my hands on some data, because I'm really curious to see how he stacks up against the face of the franchise Spawn, how he stacks up against some of the other lefty arms, because we are seeing a lot of those lefty arms really start to decay. Like Randy Johnson 100 is nowhere near what he used to be. David Price is no longer someone who's just a lock and load starter, and maybe some people would argue that he never was. So if Glavin can meet that threshold, if Glavin can perform as someone you put in your rotation and set it and forget it, that's going to be a very big deal. And supply is going to be low. These cards are only in packs. So unlike last week where we knew at the conclusion of Chris's stream there was going to be 150 to 200 of every single one of those floating around, that's not going to be the case here. These are going to trickle out. These are going to be hitting fire polls and then hitting the auction house for those that want to cash in on that moment. And I'll be curious to follow, most notably the Glavin ones, the early ones that hit, both from an auction house bid perspective as well as what they do once they start getting on the field and performing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited, man. I think there's definitely some interesting pieces with these perfects in the set to maybe shape up the meta a little differently. I'm excited. I like the direction we're taking. I'm really excited for all Chris's playoff content we have coming up, Enter the Sandman and all that. So it's exciting. I'm excited to do this again next week, dude. I'm having a blast with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too. And if there are any questions in the chat, anything you guys want to know, we could probably sneak that in here before we sign off. There's been some chat in there about what cheese is, what does pseudo mean, so we can spend just a minute talking about that. So cheese most often has to do with ballpark factors and then how teams build their team around those ballpark factors. So as you've seen within your ability to customize your home park, you can play with how that park's going to play. You can jack up the batting average. You can do that by side. You can jack up the doubles, the triples. You can bring those down. Same thing for home runs. So what people are doing, and when people toss around the term cheese, is they are loading it up to one side. For example, someone might max out their left-handed batting average and homers and then min out their right-handed batting average and homers. And so in that home park, lefties in theory, and I don't think it's a straight line 10%, but in that home park, lefties are going to perform significantly better than righties in a vacuum. And so then someone would take that inherent home field advantage or that inherent home field tilting of the table and then build a roster that can support it. So when you're at home, you want your lefties out there doing that damage. And then you want your opponent starting righties. And so what's the best way to inspire your opponent to start righties? It's to start a left-handed pitcher. So there's definitely a lot of nuance to it. If it's something that's completely foreign to you, feel free to DM me on the Discord. Be happy to talk through it, or just look around your league. You're going to see people playing with their park factors and see who's at the top of the standings and see if it's someone who's really taking advantage of a team build concept like that.
Yeah, certainly. Any questions about the game in general, DM me, DM DRC, but certainly DM me. I love talking about this stuff. I can't talk about this stuff enough. So find me on the Discord. I'm always posting in the main Discord. If you're not in there, you need to get in there. The one-hit wonder in the quarter is Dots Miller, Rockster. But yeah, no, talk to us. Let us help you about the game. That's what we're here for. We want more people to enjoy this game like we have and get to know the details better.
Awesome. So that is going to do it for us. Make sure you do join us next week on This Weekend Perfect Team. It'll be our 3rd episode, and it'll be same time, same place, and we can't wait to see you there. So with that, we'll go ahead and sign off.